Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to our community, coming to you from the I've Decided Studios in Peoria, Illinois. Our community is sponsored by I've Decided and the Greater Peoria Family YMCA. My guest with me today is Nate Domenighini.
Nailed it.
Did I get it right? Wow. And Nate is with the gBeta Distillery Labs here in Peoria, and we're going to have a great discussion today about feedback. And Nate is somewhat of an expert, I think, in this field because of everything that goes on at the Distillery Labs. But before we jump into the conversation, Nate, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and the Distillery Labs and what that's all about?
Sure. Well, it's first and foremost, thanks for having me here.
You're welcome.
A pretty awesome topic to touch on. I think that's the majority of my role is feedback. So it's going to be fun to have this discussion today. That's for sure.
Good.
I born and raised in Peoria area. Kind of lived on all four corners of the river. It's been kind of neat to be able to jump into this role with gBeta Distillery Labs, which is, part of the entire Distillery Labs effort in Peoria. And really what gBeta is, it's a startup accelerator. So for those founders and entrepreneurs here in the Peoria area, this program is designed to help those founders not only kind of focus on high payoff activities, get focused on things like traction and revenue streams and things of that nature, but to also help entrepreneurs, help those startup founders develop their messaging of their business, preparing their pitches, and hopefully putting them in position to stand in front of investors and try to capture some capital and investments. So it's a free program. We run this twice a year. So we'll do it in the spring, which will be coming up in April 14th is when we're kicking off our next cohort, and then we'll do it again in the fall. So we select 5 companies for each cohort, and of those 5 companies, they get somewhat of a concierge approach. It's somewhat of a limited squad in terms of the cohort, but that's by design. Our intention is to be able to interact with these founders one-to-one, really kind of meet them with right where they are, where their business is. So some may be pre-revenue, some may be post-revenue. And it's a matter of helping them figure out, what's their need right now? Is that a marketing need? Is it a partnership need? Are they just looking for capital investments? Things of that nature to really help put those founders in a position to scale faster, essentially. So program's entirely free, thanks to our sponsors. And
awesome.
It's fantastic to have this program here in Peoria.
That's great. And there's a lot of depth to that. And just in the few minutes there of you explaining that, it was a lot more than I understood. But it really does sound exciting. And so there's not, I guess my question is for you, just to dig a little bit deeper. It doesn't sound to me, and I could be completely wrong in this understanding because I don't know a lot about it, that there's a lot of production necessarily going on for these companies. It sounded like the way you described it was more about kind of taking things from, hey, I've got this great idea, I've got this great strategy that I want to start this business, and you guys are helping kind of get things off the ground for them. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, actually. I think, our goal is really to help these founders zero in on their focus. I think for any entrepreneur that may be out there, it's when you're coming up with an idea and you're trying to make something of it, you also have 900 other ideas running through your head.
So it's focus.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's difficult for them to select or maybe stay focused on what's going to help them get to the next level faster. Right. So we really focus on things of that nature. Of course, we're touching on feedback today, but it's entirely mentorship driven. There's only so much that I can bring to each startup and each business. I'm not an expert in every field.
Sure.
So,
but you can make connections for people, right?
Is
that kind of the goal?
Exactly. Yeah. That's really the idea, is to be somewhat of a middleman for the Peoria area. So for the business community, and there are a ton of mentors out there that I'm finding out that want to help people out, want to dedicate their time to help out founders. I think ultimately, from Peoria's mindset, long term, what we want to see for the economy is to become a little bit more focused on startups. And I think we have a a very unique opportunity to do that with Distillery Labs and bringing Generator, which is the company that I work for. They're based out of Madison, Wisconsin.
Okay.
So of course they made a local hire to run this operation, which is wise. You know, they put a lot of faith in the communities that they jump into, and really work hard at finding individuals that are connected and want to do well for their community. And that's what we're all about, is we want to see the startup ecosystem thrive here.
That's really cool. And it sounds like the needs for all of those different entrepreneurs are different, right? Depending on where they are in their development or whatever their business is that they want to start, the specific needs are different. So you kind of being that liaison is really important to really help link them with the right resources in town. And I'm not surprised to hear of the giving side of our community, because you always hear it and think about it, and I live it from a philanthropic standpoint. The Peoria community is very giving, and in this environment as well, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's kind of neat. I think we know Peorians by nature are very good at giving. Certainly from a financial standpoint, but what I've learned very quickly in this role is they're also giving of their time and sharing their art. I think that's the neat thing, is to see so many people who have been successful that want to see other people realize that same success, and the amount of effort and time that they put into the individuals that come through this program. It's impressive. It's really neat.
And I would imagine that the giving of time and of knowledge is just as valuable as money on some levels.
Oh yeah.
Right. To really help somebody get off the ground and get acclimated to what it is they want to do.
No question.
So we want to talk about the word feedback. It's the word of the week, the weekly winning word for the I've Decided community. And I'm so glad that you're here, because that's got to be a big part of what you do in your work and working with these entrepreneurs, providing that feedback.
Yeah.
And so let's dig into it a little bit. But before we do, let's provide some context. So I've got a definition that I want to share, just to kind of put it in the proper perspective. But feedback is the transmission of evaluative, easy for me to say, or corrective information about an action, event, or process to the original or to the controlling source. I think everybody out there understands what feedback is, but I don't know that everybody necessarily knows how to seek it or how to utilize it to benefit themselves. So in the perspective of gBeta Distillery Labs, how does feedback become a valuable resource for you and for the people that you work with?
Yeah, feedback is it's the number one thing, and I think as you're engaging with somebody who's either starting a business or maybe they're kind of knee deep in the business, it's what's going to help somebody grow and get over whatever hurdles that they come upon. It's going to come down to finding the advice and finding the feedback that's ultimately going to help them either consider a whole bunch of different perspectives and finding out what's best. It really comes down to, number one, are you looking for feedback in the first place, right? Or is that something you're comfortable with? I think a lot of us have ideas that we feel like, hey, I feel like this is my idea, and I think I know this is going to work out great. So maybe you're less likely to seek out feedback if you feel so confident about it. I think the people who are most successful are the ones that are sharing their thoughts and sharing their ideas with others, and really entertaining their thoughts on that. So
and so in order to in my experience working in the Y, and we do this a lot through surveys and engagement with our members and things like that, just to try to get feedback so that we know whether or not we're doing a good job or we're providing the service that people expect and want to be a part of. But, you've got to, Kim did a good job in the article that she provided this week of kind of breaking it down into 3 segments of, trusting, asking, and then, putting it into practice. And it's important, I think, when you're looking for feedback that you're seeking it from the right places. Right. And that's kind of goes in line with trust. Right. Where are you getting your feedback from, and how is it going to help you in that process? And we can't always look for feedback that's positive, right? Because we're we're fooling ourselves if we think that it's always going to be that way. We have to be able to embrace the negative side of it too. So
no question. And I think you touched on the trust aspect of that. I think that's huge, is that, you can seek feedback from anybody, and that's still okay. But the feedback that you're going to act upon most is the information that comes from somebody that maybe you already have or that has credibility with you,
right?
Or maybe somebody that you do trust has introduced you to somebody else. It's helpful to have people connect you with others that kind of lends to that credibility. You don't want to just. I mean, you can certainly bring in man on the street to just kind of give you any opinion that you want, but you're less likely to trust that or act upon it unless you understand what their background is. So
yeah, and when you trust it, then you know that the feedback's genuine.
Yeah,
right. That it's provided for the right purpose, which is to help us improve, and all of those things. And then you've talked a little bit about this in our conversation, but you got to ask for it too. You can't just sit back and wait for it to come,
right?
Because number one, it may never come, and number two, it may not come in the right framework in order to help us. So I'm curious to hear, when you're working with entrepreneurs through gBeta Distillery Labs, is what are some of the strategies that you utilize or that they utilize in seeking feedback? Because there's a number of different ways to do it. We do it through surveys, we do it through focus groups in my world. But how does it work in your environment?
Yeah, we really encourage the founders that are in this program. We really encourage them to go out and actively seek that feedback, and whether that's shooting an email to people, maybe it's a connection that we've provided, or maybe one that a mentor has provided. Said, hey, you know what? We really encourage you to reach out to this individual and seek that feedback. It's helping them understand, and I think that's the whole idea behind this program, is that you're able to take in all sorts of perspectives and apply that to what's going to be successful for you and your business. So in this case, we really encourage the founders that come through this program to be engaging with the community that they're in. So that means, shake off any fears that you have about approaching people. But the biggest thing is, when you do approach somebody for feedback, is that you have to make them comfortable to share it, right? You want people to feel like if that you are going to respond positively, no matter what the feedback is. I mean, sometimes you get feedback that to you is going to seem negative, but ultimately, if you can kind of take that where maybe it's telling you, maybe it's contradictory to what you thought. If you can take that and kind of just mull it over a little while and apply it to what you're doing, there's reason behind it too. So it plays well. Feedback plays so well in what we do at gBeta Distillery Labs, because I think having those perspectives and maybe hearing from somebody that's maybe been through the same trials and tribulations of starting a business, you're going to really kind of absorb that a little bit better than from somebody that you haven't met before, for example, or maybe reading an article even. It kind of opens your mind a little bit, but you still don't understand what was the context behind that feedback. So,
I think you hit the nail on the head there a little bit, when you have to be willing and ready to take on feedback that's negative, or constructive. Because those are really opportunities for you to learn more about maybe where there are some failures, or there are some gaps in services, or whatever it is, because it's just not realistic to think that everything is going to be great. Right. You can't be perfect in everything that you do, but as you go through the process of seeking feedback and eliciting that feedback, you got to be able to embrace that and take the negative and use it to learn from and turn it into an opportunity for future success, I think. And the other thing that I think of is when you ask for feedback from people, I think that gives you credibility to your constituents too, that people see that as a positive, that they want to know my opinion, they want to know my experiences, and when they feel that way about it, they're more likely to give you accurate feedback.
No question.
They're not just going to tell you what you want to hear. Type of thing.
Yeah. And I think, I often, and I've shared this a lot with founders too, is kind of this restaurant theory that I've always had. I grew up in the restaurant industry. So it was important to understand what our customers, well, not my customers, but what my father's customers thought of his restaurant. And, one thing that I learned from him is that you can't just expect people to share what they thought their experience was. If somebody has a bad experience at a restaurant, they're more likely to just walk out and not come back and never say a thing to you about that, right? So you have to actively seek that out. Be a manager at the restaurant, go table to table, say, how is everything going? Or, and really genuinely seek out if they're happy. You have to have that customer feedback is so important to understand what's going to bring them back the next time. But more often than not, as just a general human nature is to not hurt somebody's feelings, right? So if I have feedback, then I think I'm more apt to share it with somebody who's asked for it, than openly go up to somebody and maybe make them uncomfortable by sharing it to their face. So I think it's human for us to avoid confrontation and to avoid hurting somebody's feelings, so we don't actively just give out feedback. Some of us are different and openly share feedback and are really good at it, but I'd say it's probably fair to say the majority of us are less apt to share our thoughts with somebody unless we feel a comfortable connection with them.
Yeah, and I like your analogy of the restaurant, because we've all been in restaurants where that happens. And in my experience, where that's happening is usually where I have the best experience, because it's a better environment, right? Because when the manager's coming around and talking to every table, whether it's a fast food restaurant or a really fancy place, and I've been in both situations, it seems like the culture is much more positive, and it's a more friendly environment for the customer.
No question.
And I think I think that plays a big part of that.
It does, and if you do plan on coming back, then that if your experience was bad or is bad that second visit, that you're comfortable to reach out and mention it to somebody. That they reached out for your feedback, so that they want to get it right. So you're going to be comfortable going there as a customer, knowing that you're going to be taken care of, because they respect your feedback.
If it's done right, it's going to help you with your business or whatever it is that you're doing, because it creates an open line of communication between business owner and business user.
Absolutely.
Or client, or
absolutely.
customer. So the last piece of the puzzle that Kim framed out in the article this week was, once you gather the feedback, you go to trusted sources, you ask for the right information. Now we can do with it, right? What are you going to do with the information that you've been given? And putting it into practice, I think, is how she framed it. And that's a critical piece, right? Is number one, you got to understand what it's telling you, and then develop a strategy of how you're going to take that information and make whatever changes it is that you need to make.
Sure. Yeah, I think putting it, it's putting it into action, right? So once you get that feedback, it's a matter of what you do with it. You can put it in the bank there and just leave it there for when it's convenient, or you can actively, after you receive that feedback, I recommend people write that stuff down. Those are things that can get lost just in a passing conversation or whatever it may be, but write it down and be intentional about putting it into action and seeing, is this worth considering for, in our instance, is it worth considering for my business? Is it something that I've tried before and didn't work? Or is it something that I haven't tried? Maybe I'm somewhat against giving it a shot, but it's worth trying it, because somebody I trusted shared that with me. So, taking that feedback, and I think a lot of people kind of sometimes mistakenly perceive negative feedback as criticism of what they're doing, right? So if you feel like it's contradictory to what your goals are, maybe you're less likely to give it a shot or consider what this looks like. But I think for us, for example, with the founders that come through, I think it's a matter of, okay, you've got all this information. You sat down with 5 mentors in a 2-hour span, and they all provided you a ton of feedback. What do you plan on doing with that? And some of the founders will say, well, I'm going to have a discussion with my team about this and kind of get their perspective. But and in that instance, that feedback begets feedback. So you're sharing it with others, and then others are maybe
kind of a continuous cycle.
Exactly. And that's idea generation in its entirety. We can all have a great idea, but it's really going to come down to whether others accept that idea as effective or or innovative, whatever it may be. That's ultimately what's going to be the difference maker. So
I think it's hard, and I struggle with this too in my work at the Y when we do surveys and things like that, of separating the personal feelings away from looking at things from an opportunistic standpoint.
Sure.
Right. And that's a challenge because sometimes it's easy to look at it as a failure, right? But it's really an opportunity to be better. Right. And you really have to kind of rise above that and think about it from that perspective and try to utilize it effectively. And another strategy that I have found has worked for me and for my organization is when you go through that process of gathering feedback, and we just did this with an employee survey recently, is there's a response back to the stakeholders that provided the feedback. This is what you told us, and here's some of the things that we're going to do because of that information, which I think builds credibility.
Yep.
Hopefully builds positive culture because they get to see some of that in action. And sometimes some of the feedback you don't do anything with,
right?
And that's okay, right? Because you maybe can't change some things that they would like to see changed, but it's the communication about what you're doing that I think helps build trust in the relationship, so that open line of communication can remain open and can kind of gather that continuous cycle of feedback between customer
and it can be kind of scary. I think back when I worked in home care, senior home care, we actively sought advice and really surveyed our customer base to understand, what was their experience. And that's a scary thing is when that report comes in, it's like, okay, how did we do? But in reality, I think early on in my career as a manager of a business, that it was something that you were fearful of. Right. And over time, you realize that feedback or a criticism or negative feedback, whatever it may be, if you view that as an opportunity as opposed to a hit on your ego, then you're going to do some pretty incredible things with it. I think viewing feedback as opportunity is a great way to approach it. If you have a customer and they had a bad experience, then you should be pretty darn excited to figure out how can you fix that, because that's a great opportunity to build trust with that customer. Then bring them back, and they're going to understand that you genuinely sought out their feedback, you took it to heart, and you acted upon it. Right. People recognize that. It's imperative to be open to that feedback, not to be afraid of it. And it's okay to fear that report and, how did we do? That's going to be a natural feeling, but you should really celebrate that you've got it, because I can promise you, maybe majority of your competitors aren't doing the same thing that you are. And that gives you such a leg up in really any aspect of life, not just business.
Yeah, that's great. This has been good conversation. One, I guess, final question I have for you in your experience, or what are some of the most effective ways to gather feedback? A lot of the conversation's been more kind of personal feedback, but thinking of it more from a broader scale for companies or businesses or entrepreneurs out there who want to get larger quantities of feedback. Is it through digital ways, emails or surveys or things like that, or do you think it's more constructive when it comes more kind of in that one-on-one setting or small group conversation?
I think it kind of applies to the scenario that you're in. If you're trying to receive feedback at scale, like you're trying to survey all of your customers, then you're doing this at scale. So it's you're going to need some tools to help you out with that. And then I think in this day and age, we've got so many tools to review analytics, to look at data, and try to act upon what we see, whether it's web hits or survey results, whatever that may be, and you're looking at demographics. I think the tools that are out there to help you evaluate feedback, evaluate some sort of your survey results at scale, and kind of condense that into graphs. I mean, those are incredibly helpful tools. Maybe it's not an area that you're comfortable with, but I can assure you, just taking a look at a chart and seeing your satisfaction numbers or whatever that may be, it's pretty easily laid out for you. You don't have to be a data scientist. You don't have to understand that stuff to the fullest extent, but you have to get a good picture of what's the overall perspective of what I'm doing.
Right.
So However, I think probably the most valuable feedback, in my opinion, is to have that one-to-one conversation, because, again, as we talked about this, trust the source. If you have that one-on-one conversation, you're able to build rapport with somebody, right? You're able to kind of test the waters with who they are and what their intentions are.
There's a give and take in that experience.
No question. Right? Yeah, no question. And you may come back to that person months from now and say, hey, I really appreciated the conversation that we had. You were really open with me and it was helpful for me. So I wanted to pick your brain a little bit more. And they're going to be comfortable sharing that with you because you responded so positively to what they shared with you previously. So it's a little bit different. I think all sorts of feedback it's good. In my opinion, there's no such thing as too much feedback. You may have some opinions that are so polar opposites, from different sources. And that's okay. Understand why are they so far apart, and how can you bridge the gap and bring it a little bit closer to the center? And I think that's that's where it's like, if you have free time and you're looking to improve something that you're doing, whether it's personally for your business or at work, is spend that free time talking to people about what they think of what you do, and ask, just seek that feedback openly and actively. There's no reason not to.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for coming today and joining me. And this has been some good conversation. I hope it's been helpful for the community out there who's watching online here. But in regards to Distillery Labs, if there's anybody out there who's got an idea about a new business, can they come talk to you?
Oh yeah,
even if it's in that very infant stand?
Yeah, no question. We have my information is openly, my cell phone, my email, my calendar essentially is available on gBetaStartups.com.
Okay.
If you click on the Distillery Labs link, you can get in contact with me. I love having conversations with people. So if that's a Zoom conversation, hopefully, preferably it's coffee or a beer somewhere. but yeah, I love being able to touch base with the community. A lot of really brilliant minds here in Peoria that I'm just now starting to kind of lift the cover off of. And so it's really neat to be able to do this in Peoria, be a part of this community, and really kind of reveal a lot of brilliant minds that exist within our community that they could be operating some pretty great ideas in their basement or in their home offices at this point, where we just haven't figured them out yet. So
that's awesome. So gBetaStartup.com and then it's Distillery Labs.
That's right.
Awesome. So if you got an idea and you want to talk to Nate, look him up and reach out to him. Thanks again, Nate. And thank you to everyone out there for joining us on our community. We look forward to seeing you next month.